Thank you so much. It's really great to be here. What a lovely evening to be here to talk about technology. How exciting, huh? So last time I gave this talk, it was during COVID, so I was staring at a screen through Zoom, through nameless, faceless sea of names, which was very unfulfilling. So it's great for everyone to be here in person, and we can actually interact with each other as humans as opposed to little grid of boxes in front of each other. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about due diligence. This may be a mysterious topic for a number of folks, and as it particularly relates to early stage startup companies. A little bit about me. The photo proves that I am who I say I am here, the gratuitous headshot. And like Dyra said, I'm the CTO of Logic Boost Labs. We're a local San Diego-based startup accelerator, and we focus on B2B SaaS companies, early stage, pre-seed. I've been behind a keyboard since the early 80s, started my first company in the early 90s. I've been at this for a very long time. So I'm going to try my very best and probably fail at compressing 30 years of wrestling with due diligence on both sides of the equation in 30 minutes or less. So wish me luck. I guess the first question I'll ask here is, who here is currently or previously part of a startup company? Okay. Who here has ever been through technical due diligence? Okay, good. So you can cross-check me on this as we go through it. Who here is anticipating that they may face down technical due diligence sometime in the future? Excellent. Okay, 12 months from now? 6 months from now? Next week? Okay, we have answers for all those. They may not be happy, but we do have answers. So due diligence. Well, when does this come about? Well, investors are sniffing around, they're talking to companies, they're looking to get interested, and at some point they're attracted enough to make an investment. Consider this. So what do? They say, hey, we want to understand the story we've been told. Does it ring true? So let's commence due diligence. So that's the long and short of it. The due diligence process is really about two big items. We're going to validate the claims that we've had in conversation to date, make sure the bill of goods you have sold is true. And then we're also, because we're investors, we're going to look at the risk profile of your company. What risk does it pose to my investment? Something to point out here, there's all types of due diligence. There's legal due diligence, there's financial due diligence. We're going to talk about tech due diligence here tonight. Due diligence also has many different flavors and shades, and it really depends on the stage of the company in its life cycle. So are you a pre-seed company, a seed company, a series company, or beyond? There's a different appropriate level of due diligence for all those stages, and that's important to know. And I guess the final thing to say is that due diligence tends to end up with a pretty Boolean answer at the end. You pass or you fail. And then kind of God help you if you end up with something in the middle that you have to try to work through. Hopefully you get on the other end of it successfully. So as an investor, I'm looking at a spectrum of risk. Are you the next FTX? Or are you the next unicorn or decacorn, as it's so fashionable to say now? Now, we all want to be very far from the left side of this spectrum, for sure. And so, as an investor, we're trying to see where does this company fit in this spectrum, and we'd like to have it toward this right side here. Technical due diligence boils down to, in my mind, these 5 key pillars. And they're in approximate order of priority. The first are the people. So do you have the right team? Do they have the right skill set? Can they execute? Do you have any processes in place? How do you get things done? How are decisions made? Do you check in your code? How do you deploy your application? How do you test your application? How do you do Customer service, how do you work with all these things? Do you have a product roadmap? I'll tell you a funny story. I've asked that before, and the answer I received was, it's all in my head. That's probably not the right answer. So the product roadmap needs to be appropriate to the stage of the company. The one end of the spectrum is, it's in my head. The other end of the spectrum is, I have a 6-month, highly groomed Scrum backlog in Jira that I'm working from. You live somewhere in between those two places. I'm looking at operations, and operations is usually the biggest miss in early stage companies, and it's for a good reason. Early stage startups are struggling just to make things go, build their product. The last thing they're trying to do, or they'd like to, but they don't have the bandwidth, is to actually go put all the trimmings on how do I monitor and deploy and backups and redundancy and all these other things that are necessary table stakes for a mature software organization, but for an early stage company are tricky, troublesome, and frankly, there's just no resources to do so. And then last year is technology. And I guess I'll start with the controversial statement. Boring is good. And by that I mean, for the most part, building your software company, you want to use technologies that are tried, they're true, you have the tooling, you have the resources, and the expertise are widely available. When I come into contact with a company that's using bleeding edge technology, that's always a little interesting. Something exotic. Yes, I've gone and I've written my entire application in Clojure. You and how many people can support that, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with it, but these are risk factors in my mind as an investor. So these are kind of the pillars of what we're looking at when we're starting the due diligence process. And here's the news flash. No matter what stage, how awesome you think your company is, you will have gaps and deficiencies. Big companies have them. You certainly do as a little company. Now, the trick here is to highlight your strengths and to minimize your weaknesses. And the key is to make those weaknesses not deal killer weaknesses. You want them to be things that can be remediated either pre or post funding. So as an investor, I want to make sure that the label on what's in the box is the same as the label in the box. So we've had conversations to date, maybe the investor or the CEO of a company, and I've been told this great story. Now let's go figure out what's really here. I want to make sure those align. I want to make sure that the entire team, and the entire team can be 2 founders in a garage, have a clear vision that's shared, and we know what the end goal is, and we know the steps to get there. Hint, this is part of your roadmap. The ability to execute. So what good is it to have a roadmap and a vision if you can't get it done? So can you show us progress over time? And if you do not have processes, it's very difficult to show progress over time if it's just all done on the fly. As an investor, we're going to be very sensitive to making sure that the level of scrutiny is appropriate to the level of the company. So while I may ask you about something like, tell me about your source code, and that's a confused answer as a pre-seed company, as a series company, I want to know all about your CI/CD processes, and if you don't have those, that's probably a red flag. Super duper important, candor. I can't emphasize this enough. So if I detect even a whiff of being told a fish story, this is going to really put my antenna up at high game. And I'm very much going to try to figure out what's going on here. So it's important to know when to stop selling, and we're trying to partner with someone for investment. So you leave the sales speak at the door and just straight shoot tell what's happening as it is, facts on the ground. So with this in mind, you want to make sure that you don't have any deal killers or potential deal killers. What are some examples of these? Maybe you have built an application that has a nearly impossible to resolve security or privacy or other type of issue. That's kind of a tricky thing to solve and sort out. I can tell you another good deal killer, which is during due diligence conversations, watching two founders get into a heated spat about the vision of the company right there in front of me. That's not quite a good sign either. So, yeah, so you really want to be careful of that. So this is all fine and great, you say, but this is my reality, right? My life is, as a startup founder, startup team member, is upside down, free fire zone, full chaos. I do not have time to go deal with due diligence, technical due diligence. This sounds like a big problem. Well, it kind of is, but there are ways to think about this that can get you into a much better place. Okay. So let's say you're at the point where here comes the call, we're going to do the technical due diligence session. And it may be a series of sessions, but there's usually a starter that gets things kicked off. So the first thing you want to make sure is, what's the agenda? Now, I've seen it several ways. One is I've seen people, the evaluator for due diligence, they'll send out a questionnaire. Here's what I'm looking for. Send me some samples of this. Fill in the blank. May work for them. You may get that. The other may say, look, these are the areas and topics I'm interested in discussing. Prepare for that. If you don't get an agenda, this is probably a red flag. And I think it would be incumbent upon, if I were in this situation, to ask for one. Tell me who's showing up, what are we going to talk about? Because you don't want to show up into a room with no context from which to start a conversation. Without saying, you have to prepare. We'll talk more about that. But I can say with absolute certainty, if I show up to due diligence conversation and it's clear zero preparation is had, it's probably not a good look. So even if you have to do the midnight, turn paper due, homework kind of fest, do your best. Don't show up empty-handed. This is an interesting one, the team. Who should be there from your team as part of this technical due diligence conversation? Well, if you're a small company, it's you, your founder, CEO, and maybe the third person in your company, right? Maybe a few other people. A couple things about that team. One, make sure, absolutely sure, all of you are on the same page as to how you're going to address topics that are brought up in the conversation. Do not have a fight about these in front of me. Also, I would suggest that if there are multiple technical resources on the team, to a fault, have as many there as possible, because you never know when that one question will come that the most suitable person to answer them has just been sitting there for the last hour, has the proper answer. So I would say be over-prepared in that sense. I get this all the time. I'm so sorry, it's such a mess. In my opinion, you get one of those and stop saying that, and we're here to do business. We understand, it's okay. So don't apologize. It doesn't do any good, doesn't serve anyone any good. We already know that there are issues. It's just a matter of what they are. This goes back to the candor part. Differentiate the real self versus the ideal self. And in early stage startup mode, you are always selling. You have this beautiful picture of a reality that likely doesn't exist, that you're trying to convince people others of. This is not the place to carry on that. Here's kind of a counterintuitive one. Who knows your code better than you? You are the expert. Straight up, you're the expert. And if you're part of a team that is the right people, the right team, the right skills, the right vision, you're the domain expert. So you should be very confident in that. Mind you, this whole experience can be very intimidating until you kind of crack the seal and get into it. But until then, know that you are the expert. Ask lots of questions. Always be sure of what you're being asked. Can you repeat that for me? I don't quite understand where you're coming from. Let's maybe get at this from a different angle. It gets kind of squirrely when two people come into contact and they don't understand each other's world. Find the place of common ground. Someone in this conversation should be taking copious notes, because guess what? You probably will have to do this again and again, perhaps. And you would like to have those notes of what was asked, what went wrong, what went well, and use that to refine your whole process for the next time. And then this is hard to say, but relax. I see people get really keyed up. They're like nervous. And look, this isn't for everyone. Everyone has different styles of interacting with kind of being put on the spot. But the person who's there asking this question isn't trying to, with some exceptions, do a beat down and make you feel small or inadequate or you don't know what you're doing. Relax, have a good time. If you're on the junior end of the spectrum, use it as a beautiful learning opportunity. If you're on the senior end of the spectrum, I've had this happen before, I've ended up mentoring the due diligence person a little bit myself, and it was a lot of fun, but it was all done professionally. So we talk a little bit about preparation. There is nothing like the present. If this is coming, start tonight. Don't start tomorrow, start tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about building a technical due diligence deck. This will be your main anchor document that you will use to consolidate all of your efforts around this area. Here's a beautiful one for your crazy startup. Document. Who here likes to document things? All right, there's two of us. So, why is that? Well, documentation isn't fun. I don't have time. I'm a bad writer. I say phooey to all that. I think that at some point, you have to sit down and take notes about what makes your world tick. And I find personally the best documentation are kind of like the post-it documentation, the little snippets of facts that would otherwise be locked in someone's head, and there's no way of knowing what those are without them being written down. And the only way you can get there is you start one step at a time. Slowly develop the habit and the culture of documentation. For those of you who are skeptical of that claim, many years from now, remember this and go, I should have done that. And for the people that are going to start to have a conversion moment tonight, you will look back and go, wow, you were right. It is the right thing to do. And I'll admit, it's really tough, but you kind of have to make a commitment to start today and do it now. Here's an interesting one. You have your technical due diligence deck. Get feedback from it. If you have other members of your team, run it by them. They probably should be contributing to it. Make sure it makes sense to everyone. You, the CEO, the non-tech people, whoever. Go find an external trusted third party and have them red team your deck. That's really, really good thing to do, because You're in a completely safe environment. You can crash and burn. It's a trusted person, so you can hopefully take the knocks as positive feedback to improve it. All right, technical due diligence deck. What is this mythical beast? Well, it's what you make it to be. Basically, over time, it should have all of the information required to understand what makes your company, your software, your systems tick. You don't have one today, your first slide. I want a diagram. I don't care what it is. Is it a system diagram? Is it an architecture diagram? Is it a UI flow? Start somewhere. I can tell you one of the most difficult things to do when I'm performing due diligence is I start a conversation and there is no picture from which to form a common context to start asking questions and understanding what does what. So do yourself the service tonight, scratch out your first architecture diagram, and that's your first artifact. And in fact, in an emergency situation, if your due diligence meeting is tomorrow, if you have this in hand, it will make it go a lot better than if not, trust me. So what you do here is, you'll see on a subsequent slide a big list of items that will be tackled in technical due diligence. You will have a lot of placeholders. Fill this in as you go. You will have topics in here that are aspirational. You will have things in here that I actually know how I want to do those backups. I just don't have time to do it right now. I'm going to use XYZ for it. Put those notes in. These decks, when fleshed out, can be 60 slides, 80 slides, huge. And what your job to do is when you have a due diligence conversation, when you understand the agenda and who may be asking the questions, is to perhaps organize that deck in a way that makes most sense. You can have infinite slides of backing material. The more you have, the better, because you never know which way this conversation will go when you're going through this process. Another thing, make this document, or at least some version of it, shareable. Because you will often be asked after, hey, could you send me that deck we walked through? And if that deck has, like credentials for systems or the secret sauce or whatever, you probably don't want to send that out. So make sure it's at least sanitized appropriately so that it can go outside of your walls to a trusted party and you have no problem with that. This is not a reading test, vision test. This is truly a sample checklist of the types of things that can come up in technical due diligence. And at some point in time, most if not all of these you'll want to have some answer to. And for anyone here taking pictures, feel free, but you can also get a hold of me later. I can send you this deck, so no worries on that. Here's some interesting call outs. You'll see there are things on here. For example, we talked about, these are going to be like default table stakes. So tell me about the team. What do they do? What's your tech stack? Architecture diagram. Here's another call out. Compliance and regulatory items. Ooh. Tell me about your GDPR. Everyone has to deal with that in most ways. Or maybe you're working in fintech and you have some hard requirements that you have to adhere to. And anyone who's working in med tech, whatever, they obviously have their things they have to deal with. So this is something that you'll want to build this deck with all of these topics in there over time and have them available. And just it's something you go back to on a frequent basis and update as necessary. I'll take a quick moment to tell you what my day looks like when I'm preparing to do this. Get in my head to know what the person on the other side of the table is doing. So first, I'm going to do a ton of research. anything that I can publicly find about your company, its tech stack, what's lying there on the internet, I'm gonna probably freak you out with what I know about your tech stack if you have anything publicly surfaced, right? So I'm gonna do a lot of homework. And the reason for that is because I wanna come prepared to ask meaningful questions rather than like, hello, what's going on here? I have questions I want answered. I'm gonna drive this agenda. So if we're not getting to the point, if I can't get the answer I'm looking for, I'm gonna continue to drive to get to those answers or conclusions. You will hear me, my keyboard going, taking notes. And the reason for that is afterwards I'll be writing basically a report. What did I hear? What did I find? What am I looking for? I'm looking for gaps. This person is using this tech stack but doesn't seem to understand some basic parts of it. I don't understand. It looks like there's tension between these two people. That's a weird relationship. I'd like to know more about that. It has nothing to do with tech, right? But maybe this is a problem in early stages that we don't know all about. Going back to making sure what's in the boxes on what's on the label, am I hearing different things? Like, is everything lining up? And it's not because everyone I'm talking to is, I'm default assuming they're a fraud. It's just I'm trying to stitch together a story to understand what's really going on here. Mind you, people will do this in different ways. I usually will do a 90-minute initial meeting with follow-ups as necessary. So I have a very short period of time to kind of cut to the heart of the matter. So I have to hunt for these inconsistencies, if they exist, and drill into them just to understand what's really happening. Is it just an oversight, a slip of the tongue, or is there something else at play here? So, like I said, I've been doing this a long time, so I've met a lot of people. And you too may get lucky and meet different types of people in this process as well. By far and large, you're going to encounter two types of professionals that would conduct due diligence. You may get a generalist. So this is someone that an investor has on staff, has as an available resource, and they're a seasoned technologist. They know a lot about a lot of things, a mile wide and an inch deep. So they're there to kick the tires and make sure this thing rings true. They probably don't know, odds are they don't know your tech stack. They've used a different tech stack professionally. So they just don't know. Odds are they don't know your domain at all. But don't be fooled, because these folks have a lot of experience and they can drill in and ask really deep, insightful questions. On the other side, you can have the specialist. So someone an investor says, I need to have someone who's going to understands blockchain tech inside and out, do the due diligence. So now you're going toe-to-toe with someone who could be, the person, your hero on the other side of that table in that technology, asking you questions. So this is where it's a fine line between you have to be confident in yourself that you're the expert of what you've built versus perhaps a world expert in that technology on the other side. So know that these things can happen, and it's good to have this type of scrutiny. So these are the type of folks that I think we all prefer to have. There's a few other interesting characters out here. So we've all encountered the genius. You will hear for the next 2 hours how smart they are, and they don't talk a whole lot about what you're doing. That's a lot of fun. So with all these, the trick is don't be surprised now that you've heard about it, and figure how to make a path to do your very level best to professionally get through it, because what's the prize? The prize is to get the good positive result at the end of the due diligence. How about the lawyer? Do you ever like to feel like you're in a trial under cross-examination? But no, a minute ago you just said this. I object. Like, it can be very contentious. It's a very odd situation. So, no, they exist. The accountant type is a very interesting one. And by the way, I don't mean to disparage these professions, but hey, I am a software engineer, so I'm allowed to poke my jabs. The accountant, they have this awesome checklist, and they will read this checklist to you and tick their boxes. They probably don't understand a whole lot about what you do, and I'm sure the report will be really, really thorough. The favor's a fun one. An investor knows someone who knows someone who's a techie. We'll send him in to make sure it's good. It may be awesome. It may be a complete train wreck, who knows? And then the zealot. There is one and only one correct way to build this, and it's my way, and you're not doing it that way. And you're going to hear about that for the next 30 minutes, and I'm not going to like this and leave. So you may encounter all these types of characters in your journey, and this is just to be informative so that when you do encounter them, it's not a complete shock if you were to, and that you can just adjust how you interact with them. Remember, at the end of the day, the eye is on the prize. You want to get through this professionally. You want to answer all the questions that are asked. You want to lend a good impression as best you can with what you can control. All right, we're getting to the end here. So you've had your technical due diligence session or sessions and follow-up and what have you. News came back. Hey, it looked great. We're moving on to the next step. Positive thumbs up. That's awesome. That's super awesome, and you should be really proud of that. And you may not get that the first time, but when you do, be proud of it. But the work has just begun, because who knows what the next step lies, right? Like, oh wait, we want to come back and ask some more questions. Or fast forward in time, you're looking for funds a year from now, you're back at it again. So you can never really let your guard down. Here's the bummer. Just like investors say no, due diligence will say no too. For whatever reasons. They may be legit, it may be, who knows. But you get a big no. And that's a really big bummer. But what you need to do is try to size up what occurred, how was your interaction, what could you have done better in that whole process? Were you prepared enough? Did the person just not like you? What's going on? And so this is the follow-up. In all these cases, whether positive or negative, do your level best to follow up with whoever you interacted with. Tell me how this went. What's your summary of this? Now, I will caution that very often you won't get a response back in terms of like, oh, you will never get, here's my report, or very rarely, right? You may get some feedback, and it may be cryptic. Many times you'll just be ignored. But if you can get feedback, look, it was really great until you started talking about XYZ, and it just fell apart. I didn't understand. It didn't help me out. Try your very best to get that feedback. And then again, you make it through the gauntlet. Documentation never ends. Keep on trucking, because you will be doing this again and again, and you will thank your future self for, if you do document, to continue, and if you don't, that you've started. Well, that's pretty cool. We've convinced an investor to give us money. We passed the gauntlet. Awesome. I hate to break it to you, but you've just started the journey. So, as you mature forward in your organization, demands, as the sound of freedom out there masks our conversation, all of a sudden your software enterprises are looking at it, and they would like to buy your software. But there's this pesky risk manager of their company who says, I need your SOC 2 compliance. And you go, what's a SOC 2? And This is a real email. Hey, this is from a portfolio company of ours. Hey, someone told me I need a SOC 2. What's a SOC 2? Could you get me one by tomorrow's meeting? So for those who don't know, SOC 2, and there's a whole host of these, NIST, FedRAMP, there's tons of compliance regimes. They are very in-depth. They're almost not technical, they're almost process and accounting. How do you do things? How do you guarantee these systems are secure to standards? These types of things. And it is tons and tons of documentation. So the work you do for technical due diligence today, even if it's your very first diagram to start the process, is the seed for future self when you've evolved to the point where you need these things in place, and you won't be able to do it without it. So I'll leave you with that thought. Well, thank you for letting me drone on about technical due diligence for the last 38 minutes. Okay.